Hi, thanks for being here today. Good afternoon. My name is Chris Kim. I'm the interim dean of the Schmid College of Science and Technology. Typically for events, when we have a certain number of RSVPs, we take an internal poll into what percentage is going to show up, and we always guess less than 100%. You all have accomplished the rare feat of appearing at what we think is about 130% of the RSVP numbers. So you have bucked the trend, and some of you have not formally RSVP'd for this event, but that's okay. We're happy to have you all here as part of the third annual Schmid Family Lecture. So you might be aware, who here is from Schmid College in any capacity? All right, a good number of folks. Thank you all. So you are all in some way associated with the Schmid family, which in 2008, please do not raise your hand and tell me if you were alive or barely alive at that time, because that was 17 years ago. I have a little press release. Orange, California, September 4th, 2008, Chapman announces naming of Schmid College of Science. Chapman University's new College of Science now has a name thanks to generous donations from a pair of Santa Ana brothers, Don and Dick Schmid, who are sons of one of Orange County's most visionary farming and business leaders, Walter Schmid. The new Schmid College of Science, at the time, will be named for the Schmid family, whose friendship with Chapman University is as historic as the family's interwoven relationship with Orange County. And I, as a relatively newly minted assistant professor in 2008, recall that naming ceremony and the announcement over at the, I think, the packing house area back in 2008. And it is a truism that the Schmid name is associated with some of the greatest things across Chapman University, of course, starting with Schmid College. The Schmid Gate, people know the Schmid Gate right out there out front, yes. The Waltmar Foundation, named after Walter and Margaret Schmid, fun fact there for you, which also is associated with the theater, and of course the Schmid Family Lecture, which is now entering its third year. And the wishes of the Schmid family for the Schmid Family Lecture were to host an esteemed scientist who is working broadly in a range of interdisciplinary fields, who can come and share that knowledge and that experience with our community, with it being a student-centered, student-focused, student-driven, and in many cases student-nominated and selected process, and have someone also learn about Chapman in the process. So it's been great to have Dr. Hoffman here to kind of, and put her through her paces today. It's a packed day, of which this is the highlight for you all. And so we're really grateful to have her here. So with that said, the Schmid Family Lecture this year is pleased to welcome and introduce, and I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Kira Hoffman from the University of British Columbia. I will make sure I wrote some keynotes for myself here as well. She's a fire ecologist who received her bachelor's at the University of Victoria in geography, did a fellowship at the University of Oregon and received her PhD in ecology, also from University of Victoria. Conducted a postdoctoral research fellowship at the University of Waterloo, and then at the University of British Columbia, where she is now a research associate, fire ecologist, and practitioner. The sources of support that she has received that are associated with the work she'll be presenting to you today have come from a range of foundations, including the National Geographic, the Trebek Institute, and the Pacific Institute for Climate Solutions, which has supported her position in many ways as she works in the small town of Smithers, which is quite far. How many kilometers from British Columbia, or from Vancouver rather, are we?
It's about 1,400 miles
Okay.
north of Vancouver.
So you might be the farthest flung University of British Columbia employee, probably. Maybe, or is there one farther than?
No, I'm definitely the farthest.
You were the farthest,
yeah.
okay. Most remote, where she does Indigenous-led fire stewardship and management, which we're really excited to hear about today. So without any further ado, and thanks to AV's reminder, I will now move this microphone so it's not in the way, but please give a warm Schmid welcome to Dr. Kira Hoffman.
Thank you for having me and for removing the microphone that I would definitely trip over, because I'm very much a hand talker. I like to interact with people and I like to know who's here. So we're going to start just by putting your hand up if you're interested in wildfire science. Okay. Well, you might be after this lecture. That's the whole intention. Has anyone here worked as a hotshot or a first responder? Okay, it's just a few. Has anyone here experienced a whole day of wildfire smoke? What about a week? What about a month? What about a year? Okay. I'd like to kind of know, and I'm like, my approach to fire and to sharing my research is really trauma-informed. It can be hard to see images of fire, especially with this crowd, because my guess is that most people in this room were deeply impacted by the LA fires. So I just want to let you know I am going to be sharing images, and I'm going to be sharing images that are hard to see because it's my process also of dealing with wildfire trauma. It's like telling stories and sharing information helps me kind of work through some things. So if you're not comfortable, I completely understand if you need to get up and take a break. But it's my hope that we can kind of move through this together, and also that we can have kind of this better relationship with fire through this 45 minutes, and you can take that away into the next phase of your life where you're heading. So fire is what makes us human. It's truly one of our greatest inventions, and controlling it is one of the best things we've ever done. But on that evening, at around 11 a.m., when a fire broke out in Southern California, in Ventura, where I was living with my family at the time, I knew there was really nothing I could do to control this fire. This is Ventura. It's December 5th, 2017. I just put my 6-month-old son to sleep. These red flag warnings had been issued for 2 weeks. There'd been no rain. And I was this new tired mom. I was just kind of complacent. I was like, I'm a fire ecologist. Like, there's no way. There's no way this fire is going to get in the city. I live in a really urban environment. I live in a city. And so I thought, this isn't the wilds of Canada. I'm safe. Well, this is 2 hours later. And luckily, my husband keeps the gas tank full, and he likes to remind me of that all the time. And we were able, to evacuate the city of Ventura, where many people actually couldn't. The evacuation muster station, where we were supposed to go to, was on fire. Homes just a block away from our home was burning. And as we drove down the Pacific Coast Highway, fire was burning on both sides. Incredibly traumatic. Really, really hard to drive away that evening from our city, from our home, not knowing what was going to happen. And this is what did happen. Some homes lost, other homes standing. This is our neighborhood. Why one house and not the other? Were they fire smart? Was it luck? Was it just not really knowing the answer? This is the kind of things that plague you after a fire. If only, if only, if only. But there's so many things that are out of our control. Fire is powerful, it's dynamic, it's scary. It's this thing you're constantly hearing about on the news, on the radio. It is just constantly in your face now. This is the city of Jasper in 2024, right kind of, I shouldn't say near, but in Canada, near-ish, 20 hours away from where I live. Pacific Palisades. Maui. Tropical places we never would have thought would burn. We're entering into this new fire reality. And fire is coming, and it keeps coming. And we keep thinking we can stop it, we can suppress it. But we lost control to do that quite a few years ago now. We have smoke impacting cities like New York City, Canada smoke, BC smoke, thousands of miles away from the nearest wildfire. And especially in British Columbia, we're dealing with the impacts of smoke. And although, sadly, there's a lot of direct firefighter fatalities, 70,000 people died from smoke-related impacts in 2023 alone in North America. So smoke is a significant natural disaster. This is what wildfire looked like. This is hectares burned just in British Columbia in 2023. This is the same area that covers Maryland, the state of Maryland. We are talking about massive impacts to the land and to the people who live there. These are the 6 most impactful wildfire seasons on record in British Columbia, and they've all occurred since 2017. So fire is very much a part of every summer. We've become so good at putting wildfires out that we've created a lot of the dense, dead vegetation that is fueling our wildfires year after year. So this is very much an anthropogenic-driven catastrophe. But what if I were to tell you this isn't a wildfire? What you're looking at is a cultural burn. It's being led by the Gitineau Nation, so 20 hours north of Vancouver, in the boreal and temperate rainforest kind of area of British Columbia, right near the panhandle of Alaska. What we're doing is using fire to keep the community safe. So we're fighting fire with fire. So I've always loved fire. And this is not something you hear very often because we've all been taught fire is bad. Is everyone really familiar with Smokey the Bear here? Yes. Okay, well, Smokey's got kind of a new campaign coming, hopefully. But for me, I grew up on a farm and I burned as a child, and I learned as a child that fire is a really healthy component of our ecosystems, but also our livelihoods. So fire made, when we burned in the spring, it created this really thick fluorescent green grass that would come up. And then it was the perfect fodder for our horses. I grew up riding horses. I grew up on a farm. This was very normal for me. That's me squishing Saskatoon berries in that bucket there. We burned our Saskatoon bushes so that we would have these big, plump, juicy berries so we could make wine for our family. So very different relationship with fire, and one that I'm definitely carrying through. Later in life, like most pyrophiles myself, I became a heli-attack firefighter. So I worked across North America, getting deployed to United States, eastern provinces as well. And for me, it was a challenging road to firefighting. So just like being on a hotshot crew, less than 10% of positions are comprised of women. So I was affectionately known as Fire Barbie. I was the only woman on the crew, and it remained that way for the entire time that I fought fire. And yeah, things are changing. Hopefully they'll be changing a little bit faster so that we can get women and, of course, other people who are marginalized into positions of power and authority in fire. When there are people in those positions, they're shown that things are safer, communities are more protected, people make better spatial awareness decisions. And so there's a lot of different things going on when you change the power dynamics and structure of fire. So for me, like a medical doctor, I write prescriptions. So I want to figure out where's the fire going to go? How much fire does it need? When do we need to apply it in order to make these lands healthy again? And for me, this is really bringing back beneficial fire to the landscapes and the communities that need it. So the land is our food table, and fire is what helps fill our pantry. This is Elder Darlene Vey. She's from the Gitineau Nation. And she told me that right before we lit the first legal burn in the territory in over 100 years. She had been taught by her dad when she was a child how to burn, but it was the land in later years that was her teacher. And I'm sharing the research, the collaborative research that we do today with their permission. It is very sacred, it's very place-based, and very, very important to that community, just like many other nations or tribes would have the same kind of fire knowledge. Darlene's a great-grandmother. She's also a complete warrior in the bush. She is a woman that you can barely keep up to, and she is such an incredible teacher and fire knowledge holder. So we're burning in these areas to increase the productivity of food and medicinal plants. The nearest grocery store is over 2 hours away, so people want to go out into the forest and harvest food, and fire is what allows them to do that. So fire is this tool. It increases nutrients into the soil. It helps specific food plants grow. And then just like horses, when they burn in the spring, the thick, thick grass comes out, and then it creates the perfect fodder for moose, which is the primary staple in the diet of that nation. So they need fire. The land needs fire. Everyone needs fire, but we need to get the right kind of fire in the right place at the right time. This is what the forest looks like. And when fire was banned across North America, really very much so about 100 years ago, and Indigenous people were really confined to reservations, a lot of the fire-dependent landscapes and the places people would go to manage with fire were lost. So fire practices, much like language, have suffered loss. It's not like it used to be. We called it Anson Mai, and here Darlene is really referring to the one true berry, which is black huckleberry. It's a very nutritious berry, it becomes more nutritious when you burn it. And this is really, really important because the plants are sick now, and the berries don't taste like they used to, and actually the people aren't as healthy as they used to be because they're not eating this berry. So Darlene wants to see these plump, juicy berries that used to be the size of marbles returning to their patches again with the time she has left. And my role when working with Darlene is to kind of weave Western and Indigenous science and knowledge together so that I'm learning from her and she is learning from me. And we've created good ways to work together. She couldn't carry the drip torch, it was too heavy, so we got her a smaller drip torch. We call this the elder and child torch because anyone can use it, especially little kids and the 90+ crowd. Very welcome on our fires. But she's telling me about what the landscape used to look like, how they used to be able to ride horses through it, and you can see that'd be pretty hard to ride horses through now. It is thick, thick brush. And so we're kind of sharing this new technology with these old ways of knowing. And of course, as a biophysical scientist, I wanted to go and measure everything. Get out there, I'm get the petimeter, how many tons of fuel are on this landscape? I get so excited, I'm we have to measure it all. And sometimes Darlene just stops me and it's just hey, if you were just to walk through the forest and listen to the crunch of the tinder underfoot, you'd know that it's time to burn. We don't need all your fancy things. We can just do this. And I have to take a step back sometimes out of my perspective and my Western worldview to be wow, you're right. If I were just to take off my glove and feel the soil, to touch it and know that it's time to burn, that would be really good. And we're working on kind of these cross-cultural indicators, much like the Beaufort wind scale. When you have a flag blowing, you know it's blowing this many knots. You know that that's what the wind's doing. But what if this flower is blooming, you know it's time to burn. Or if you hear this kind of noise in the forest, you know it's very, very dry. And so these are the kinds of transdisciplinary scientific approaches that we're using. Here, Mike is a guardian, so he is a fire keeper for the nation. He and I are working to figure out, okay, what's gonna happen today? We are using some of the tools for fire weather, measuring humidity and temperature, and trying to figure out where our smoke's gonna go. What kind of fire are we gonna see that day? And we're talking it through. And we're really learning about how to exchange knowledge together, how to exchange observations together. And really for us, it is not so much just about hectares burned. It's really about bringing people together to share in burning practices and also like harvest food together. We really talk more about not just the science of fire, but also the art of fire and the heart of fire, because it brings people closer to the land, much like forest bathing, fire bathing. And it's really hard to break down when you've been taught for so long that this thing's bad. To bring people out and just be like, this thing is bad. It's also good, and there's a million other things in between that it also is. And it's up for you to kind of discover that. So these onions were hidden underneath the soil, and people hadn't seen these onions in a really, really long time. This is just 2 weeks after our burn, and they're there. They'd been forgotten, and they're coming up, and fire's woken them up. It's interesting, in the Gittinyah language, there's no word for wildfire. There's no word to describe an out-of-control wildfire. Makes you think, well, maybe they just didn't have wildfires in the past, or maybe they only saw fires as being good, as being something that worked alongside them instead of against them. Here, Darlene and Corinne are picking stinging nettles, highly nutritious staple. Again, this is just a few weeks after our burn, and they're gonna take those nettles and make them into pesto for pizza. So there's a lot of food. It's all about food. We talk nonstop about food. We're all fire foodies, is what we call ourselves. And there's just this rush into the forest after the burns to collect and harvest. This is hazelnut, so we see really productive hazelnut orchards that were all transplanted there from many, many, like thousands of miles away. These hazelnuts came. And they need fire in order to thrive. And we see them just responding with the right kind of fire. And I want to say that we don't always get it right. Sometimes we mess it up. Sometimes we fail. Because how are we supposed to know sometimes when that knowledge has suffered so much loss? So we're trying to find our way together. And when it works, it's just really wonderful. And when it doesn't, we learn from our mistakes. And there has to be room for failure in the sciences in order to take a step in a different direction. The strawberries are incredible that come up after burning, and we get so many children out who are the perfect. You know, when your back kind of gets sore from bending down so low, the children are just so good at picking strawberries. So they come out. And it's so wonderful to see so much food security come to a community that has none. And we can go from this, so this is deciduous stand, and keep an eye on this cottonwood here, right in the back. Maybe, don't have a laser. Right here. And this is just a few weeks later. So it's just, and this kind of reminds me of California spring. You know, when it just goes so green and it just feels so alive. Well, we get to kind of replicate that a lot, so. And also, you know, using fire doesn't mean killing trees. It doesn't mean impacting species in negative ways. It probably is impacting some species, for sure. But remember that this place was burned all the time. And so many of those species are actually really excited to see fire again after so long. And a lot of the trees have it in their genetics, in their DNA, to know what to do with fire. We have a lot of pine species that are semi-serotinous, so that means they open up with fire at a certain temperature. So they're excited. They're like, oh yeah, we're ready for the fire. The birds are like, oh, we've been missing these nesting cavities for so long. This is great. And the deciduous is thriving. So deciduous trees here, like birch and aspen, They're fire dependent, they're clonal species, and they really, really need fire in order to be healthy. There's one road in and one road out of this community, and we are using fire to prepare for the inevitable fire that's going to come. So we're burning right along transportation corridors to keep them safe and open. Keep in mind that Indigenous communities in Canada are 43% more likely to be evacuated by a wildfire, and they need to make really, really tough decisions. Am I going to invest in accessing clean drinking water, or am I going to invest in wildfire risk reduction? Imagine having to make that choice. And they chose fire because, and I want to say because, they know that fire also helps clean water. It's so related to the water cycle, and so they're thinking if we do fire, we'll help with our water crisis as well. This is a burn we did in a forested landscape. These are huge piles of debris wood. This area won't be replanted. This will be the next berry harvesting site for the community. They can walk there. It's the first berry site that we've done in over 100 years. It is really hard to tell you how hot this fire is. It is amazing every single time that I burn. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm never gonna have eyebrows again. My sunglasses are gonna melt to my face. Like every single time I just think, gosh, I forgot how hot this was. We used to burn a lot, and we are falling short on burning now. The state of Florida burns more than the entire country of Canada every single year in the Everglades. So Canada's not burning very much. This is like 5,000 hectares, which is like 8,000 acres, 10, 11,000, sorry. That's gonna be hard for me. It's not very much. We need to do a lot more fire management. We need to talk about good smoke, bad smoke. We need to let people know we're gonna be burning. And one of the ways that we get around kind of when people have smoke sensitivities is we'll just drive a bus into a community and say, who wants to go shopping today? Because we're gonna be burning. And then we'll take those at-risk people out and we'll burn for the day and we'll drop them off at night. So there are ways to mitigate smoke. We just need to be creative. We need to think through it. And we need to realize that the impacts are not the same across the population. We need to be alerting people that they may be sensitive to smoke because they may not have that information. There's no cell service. A lot of these rural communities, people are living in very close to the landways. So imagine a place where we coexist with fire. Imagine having a thin forest, having these low severity ground fires to protect things like old growth, making sure that we're using fire directly in a city setting. Look at Australia. Look at the city of Sydney. They're burning right in downtown Sydney in the parks. Those are places where they see risk. So why are we so separate from fire? Why do we live in cities and just say it will never be me, and then it is? So we need to think of all of our landscapes as fire prone, and they are fire prone. The west coast of North America is incredibly fire prone, whether you live in a city or not. So humans first controlled fire about 2 million years ago. It really transformed us from these kind of raw food foragers to these complex community-minded beings. It brought us language, culture, love. It really is what makes us human. Do you remember that 6-month-old baby that I was fleeing that California wildfire with? He's now 8. And we're burning together. So this is on our property, on our farm in northern BC. And he's learning, just like I did as a child, that yes, it's okay to fear fire. Fire can be scary, but it can also be this life-giving force. It can be this incredible tool that we can utilize to keep our communities, our home, our food, and our whole families safer. So thank you.
I don't know if we have more than this microphone, so I'll either ask you to project or I'll come to you with any questions you might have for Dr. Hoffman.
I was wondering, I know that a lot of the issues we're having with fires in America is like prediction of fire, where it's gonna burn next, smoke, transportation, all of that. Do you think that utilizing and incorporating the native ways of their burning will allow us to better understand and predict fires, or is that something that's just always changing and gonna be an issue?
We can definitely predict where fires are gonna occur. And we know that because we can predict lightning pretty well now. We know where hotspot and high densities of lightning are. We also know where hotspots and high density of human ignitions are. So we generally have a good idea about where wildfires are gonna happen. So we do wanna focus in on using proactive, whether it's mitigation or burning, in those high probability areas. Those high probability areas are almost always the most contentious though, because they're the places where everyone lives. And fires can be this really complex being where people are very anti-fire or very pro-fire. One thing that's really interesting about Florida is fire is really not politically charged there, because Florida has such a history of the Army and the military, and fire is very much structured in what we call the incident command, where there's a single decision maker. People really understand the Army kind of system, and so they think, okay, fire is okay if it goes with that system. And so this really interesting kind of human dimension of fire there, where trust is placed in the people doing it because it follows a structure and organization that they understand. In other places, that's just not the case. And so I would really encourage a lot of folks to think about fire in more of that human and social side, because that's an area where we really need a lot of research, and we really need to understand why people make the decisions they do. Why do people think or feel a certain way about fire? Like, what will happen to you when you go home after this talk? Will you think about, okay, I feel the same way about fire? Or will you think, maybe I've been biased by my upbringing that's taught me to view fire in a very specific way. I know I'm biased in mine as being very pro-fire.
So let's say we wanted to have a more proactive strategy and implement controlled burns across, say, all of California or all of British Columbia. I mean, how many resources would you realistically need for such a thing?
You need a lot of resources. Luckily, in British Columbia, we have a massive problem right now in forestry, where there's a little bit of issues getting our lumber to the places that it used to go, I'll say. So because of softwood lumber disputes, we have a whole economic arm of people that are out of work. Okay, we have whole mills shutting down. And those people who work in forestry are so perfectly suited to work in fire. And so what we need to do is just do a little retraining, and then we'll have a whole workforce that can be dedicated to proactive fire, because the skills are the same, really. So I would encourage you to think, like, who's a really good fit for this? Is there a lot of people, like a lot of people who previously worked in agriculture, a lot of people who previously worked as different types of labor, millwrights, all these different people with kind of these applied skills are needed in the proactive fire world.
So it'd be like, instead of the Army Corps of Engineers, it would be like the Army Corps of Fire.
Yeah, I mean, you could think really creatively about this problem.
Do you think that Canada and United States should start implementing more controlled fires and like rather than just British Columbia and Florida? Like, should it be all over the country, or should we just like narrow in on certain areas in each country?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the interesting thing about fire is, of course, it knows no boundaries. It's constantly burning across the Canadian-US border. And we have an interagency fire exchange. So like when we go, for example, to the States to burn, I come to California to actually burn a lot. We bring other people to burn. We want to kind of mobilize that knowledge so we actually understand the best places to burn. Not every place is going to be well suited to burning. So we need to be having these conversations about, okay, we should be burning in this area. We should be burning in this area. Like California is an incredibly fire-dependent place. There will be fires here. Canyons are great places to do prescribed fire. We know that they're very, very at-risk landscapes. There is people working on this problem, and a lot of it comes with more of that engineering, that tech background for sure, with using many different types of approaches to burning. So we have a lot of drone ignitions. We have a lot of different ways of using fire now that we can be applying in different places that we couldn't apply before.
I think there's very much like a culture in America of fear toward fire. You mentioned like Smokey Bear. So are there any like educational programs or opportunities that you've worked with to kind of create more cultural collaboration to reduce that fear?
Yeah, so we work a lot with kids, and we have put, in British Columbia, fire into the BC curriculum, so K to 7, where we're introducing fire as important for biodiversity and culture. And we instead of Smokey the Bear, we have Ember the Firefox, who is like pro-fire in Canada. So, you know, Ember comes in, and I've been with Ember. What we do is we bring the kids out in the parking lot, we light a hay bale on fire, everyone gets really excited. We bring in fire departments, we bring in kind of all these first responders, personnel to come in and say, hey, fire is important. And it's really good that they learn about it at that age so that they can develop a healthy respect for it. And then also you don't have a lot of things like gender reveal parties where you suddenly have massive fires coming from those, and people thought, well, I never would have thought, because they just didn't know. But what if instead of it's like, don't play with matches, you're like, don't be irresponsible with fireworks. I mean, there's some good messaging that you can learn as a child that can really help solve some of these problems. And they're very, very simple, and education is a huge component of it.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I was super interested in hearing about how like the actual process works for like purifying the water after a burn, or like making things actually more nutritious. I would love to know more of like the process behind that.
Sure. So like on a biogeochemical kind of lens? Yeah? Okay, so what happens is we try and time our burns to right before it rains, because we know that ash and water really bind together. So we're looking for those times right before, usually within 24 hours if we can get it right. And then you get really good soil absorption of those nutrients. They bind to the roots of those plants, and they're available right away. If it doesn't rain, sometimes you get wind removing those nutrients from the soil. And with water purification, it's more of a long-term 7-generation thinking about cleansing water with fire, because you're creating more places for native vegetation to grow and thrive, and you're also supporting big, big trees, eventually is the plan. One thing that we have done is try and better understand how salmon come up the rivers. There is stories about using fire, so smoke specifically, to protect salmon as they're coming up to keep the water cool. So there's all sorts of different things that you can learn about fire that's connected to really everything. And it's very fascinating to be like, I just at the tip of my learning. Like there's so much more to learn. And it's in all of these different cultures. And it's in our own culture too, because don't forget that you come from people who have all used fire. Again, it's our human element. It's our shared evolution. So everyone has a culture with fire. They're just maybe a little bit more separated from it. And you think you'll find that if you're sitting around a campfire, what do you feel? Usually like a contentment, a peacefulness, very few of us sit by a campfire by ourselves, right? It's a gathering, it's a community thing, and we've been doing that forever. So there's a reason why it feels the way it feels.
Hello, very nice talk. Super interesting. My question is, so you said how the elder kind of challenged your Western views of science and your kind of way of, I guess, collecting data in that sense. Can you give me another example of how you maybe implemented those cultural ways of knowing rather than like Western science, or how can we implement that in education within children when the culture now is so separated? Like I feel like we're so past that, but that's such an important part, like touching the soil and really just knowing rather than using all these gadgets and things like that.
Yeah, I think like the biggest thing is to co-design and co-produce research in place together. So even though I work at the University of British Columbia, I live in the community that I do my research in. And that's expected of me, because how else am I gonna learn about a place if I don't truly live in the place? And so when we are out there co-creating, it's really helpful for the science. So I went out there with like 10 ideas, and I was like, should we do this, 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 this? And they're like, no, let's not do any of those, right? And then we come back to the table and we say, okay, what about this? This is a trimmed down version. And then they'll say to me like, oh, it's gotta be something we can actually do, right? When you're not here, because we're gonna be here forever, and you might not. And so we really have shaped the design of the research to recognize that. You know, again, it's the 7-generation thinking. They're always thinking about the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren. It's not really within my upbringing to think about that as much. It's just not the way that kind of I've been taught to see the world. So I think that understanding kind of your positionality or what you're bringing to the research is really, really important. So I'm not Indigenous. I'm very upfront about that. I, have taken all my schooling in a Western setting. And it limits me to some things, but it also empowers me to others. And recognizing the strengths and weaknesses of both systems and coming together to form something that's gonna work for both an institution and a community. And really, it's all about trust. Yeah.
Hi, your talk was amazing. It was really inspiring. I just wanted to ask you, I can imagine how it's so hard to implement controlled fires in the States because of our agriculture and cattle being such a huge part of our economy. So I guess, how would you go about bridging the gap between the farmers who are scared of controlled fires because of the smoke and how it's gonna affect their cattle between, I don't know, how would you go about doing that?
I actually work on this problem a lot because I live in a place where there's a lot of cattle and a lot of farming. The difference is that our farmers are burning for the cattle, right? To, again, create that grass for cattle. And so they see fire as a really helpful tool. The cows get a little bit loopy when there's a lot of smoke. They definitely don't know what to do. Sometimes they stand in circles and they just kind of look around. It can be a little bit hard for them because instinctually they want to go, right? But they know they're trapped. So I think that the big thing here is education too, And like, we are gonna have smoke and we are gonna have wildfire. So why not try and make sure that we have smoke at the times when it's good smoke, so we can control the venting, it's going right up, it's not dissipating out. We already have a lot of pollution in Southern California. Let's make sure that we're burning at a time when it's not gonna make that so much worse. Let's try little experiments. What is working for farmers? What's not? Get them involved in the research so that they can have a say in whether it's effective or not. Because often we go and do things without ever knowing if it works. We're not there monitoring. We're not waking up at 5 a.m. and going out there and being like, yeah, it's a real bad day out here. There's a lot of pollution. We're not doing that. So we need to partner with people who are the eyes and ears on the ground so they can be telling us if it's effective or it's not.
So another approach that folks have taken for kind of regenerating areas is regenerative grazing, right? And thinking about those types of practices. Is there cross-fertilization there, or are those kind of completely different worlds in terms of these types of practices?
We use grazing a lot, especially in our fuel breaks. So in Canada, we're known for big fuel breaks like Alaska. Grazing can be a big part of that to actually control your vegetation so that you're not having to constantly upkeep it all the time. If, let's say, you don't have a good burning window, bring the cows in, let them do the grazing for you. And so, there's a lot of research on kind of grazing as this ecological herbivory fire replacement. So it can be a really helpful tool.
I know some folks have to be somewhere at 1 o'clock, but I wanted to actually take the last speaker's question as the opportunity to thank a few folks because we have in our midst, I think, although one person just left, many of the former deans of Schmid College. Dean Janine Hill is here, Dean Andrew Lyon is here, Dean Mike Ibba is here, now provost. He had to head to some meeting that I'm sure he's enjoying less than this talk. And I also want to make a special thanks to Alex Lewandowski, who I think is just exiting to set up the next thing, but all of the Schmid College staff who worked really tirelessly to put this together and make it move very seamlessly. I checked with Kira ahead of time. She said, oh, it was very seamless from my end. I said, phew, because on our end, we were kind of running around in circles a lot of time. It's like when you set up a party and you hope people will show up, but you're not sure, right? And so I thank you all for being here because that's an important part of this being a great event. I really enjoyed hearing all the questions, especially student questions, and I do really hope that you take those back home to your families, to your dorms, to your apartments, to your study groups, to the folks who maybe weren't able to make it today, and say, I just heard this really fascinating talk, and it's made me think a little bit differently about how I view those things. And I really appreciate that sentiment if you go out and bring that out into the world, because I think that's a large part of what the Schmid family envisioned when they decided to kind of support and launch this annual Schmid Family Lecture. And so then I'll almost conclude by thanking Laura Cook, Karen Hankinson, and Dick Schmid as the representatives of the Schmid family for being here today. We have a few gifts for you, but I know you don't like the attention, so they're in another room. I'll show them to you. But the gift for Dr. Kira Hoffman I do have right here. You do not get to escape without some public thanks, and feel free to take that out so people can see it if you want. Alex.
Oh my goodness.
Alex told me what it was. So this is just a token of our appreciation as a college.
Oh,
it's a
thank
plaque
you.
we put together. So I look forward to a photo showing me where you've placed it in your home. Very prominent spot, I hope. But can you all please join me in thanking Dr. Kira Hoffman again? All right, thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you again for having me.